The Northeast Freight Line stretches like a dark spine through the industrial corridor, and Marcus Reed has learned every inch of it. Over the past 14 years, he's memorized this place. Every rail, every connection, every electrical junction that keeps the trains running safe and on time. The 11 p.m. to 7 a.m. shift doesn't really end anymore. It bleeds into the morning, into the drive home, into that quiet moment he spends standing over his daughter's bed before he finally lets himself sleep. Tonight is a Tuesday in November. The platform is empty except for the sound of wind cutting through the rail yard. Marcus moves with precision, the kind of precision that comes from doing something so many times it becomes meditative. He carries his inspection equipment with him. Multimeter, thermal scanner, flashlight, the tools that keep the trains running, the tools that keep the lights on in other people's lives. While he drives home in the dark, Marcus Reed is 39 years old, and he hasn't done anything impulsive in over a decade. The job is stable, the hours are punishing, the pay is enough. But only if enough doesn't require him to dream about anything beyond his daughter's college fund and the mortgage he'll have paid off in 12 years. If nothing goes wrong, and nothing usually does, that's the trade-off. No surprises, no advancement, no risk, no loss. He's learned to accept this version of life. Most days it feels like the right deal. Zuri was 7 last month. She has her mother's eyes, wide, quick to tears, quick to laugh, and her father's stubbornness. She sleeps with one arm hanging off the side of her bed, like she's reaching for something, even in sleep. Every morning before school she wakes up ready to argue about everything. Why she needs to wear a jacket, why she can't have cookies for breakfast, why her father couldn't come to career day because he works the overnight shift. He doesn't have a good answer for that last one. He just kisses the top of her head and promises to come next year. He's been making that promise for 3 years. Raising her alone wasn't the plan. Plans, he's learned, are things you make before you understand what life actually costs. Her mother left 4 years ago, not cruelly, not dramatically, just with the kind of honesty that almost made it worse. I can't do this version of things she'd said one evening, standing in their kitchen with a packed suitcase, and he hadn't asked her to explain which version she meant. He already knew. The day after she left, Marcus had taken a week off work. He'd picked Zuri up from school early, every single day that week. By Friday, he'd learned something important. Having your daughter home all the time doesn't make the loss hurt less. It just makes it hurt differently. Mrs. Chen, his neighbor, watches Zuri on Tuesday and Wednesday nights. She leaves notes. Zuri did her spelling. She had mac and cheese for dinner. She asked about you. Simple observations that somehow contain everything he needs to know. 2 years ago, Marcus had applied for an advanced supervisory program through the Rail Authority, a 2-year track that could have moved him from maintenance into operations management. The job would have meant better pay, more regular hours, the possibility of actually planning a future. He'd been accepted, he'd registered for classes. Then he realized there was no one to pick Zuri up from school on the days his training ran long. Mrs. Chen helps. But asking her for that kind of commitment felt like asking too much. So he withdrew his application 4 days before the deadline. He'd told himself he'd apply again in the next cycle. He never did. He was in the way of many men who had quietly absorbed too many losses, extremely good at convincing himself that this version of life was fine. Not good, not fulfilling, just fine. Fine was sustainable, fine was safe. The thermal scanner picks up a temperature fluctuation in section 4. Marcus stops, checks it again. Normal range. He makes a note anyway. Attention to detail is what keeps people safe. At 2:47 a.m. he notices something odd. A private rail car. Expensive. The kind that costs more than he makes in 2 years. It's attached to the main freight line. The electrical connection is damaged. The lights inside are flickering erratically, like something running out of time. Marcus frowns. That shouldn't be there. He would have seen the manifesto, would have prepared for it. He approaches carefully, professionally. The car is dark, except for the emergency battery-powered lighting. As he reaches the entrance, the door opens. A woman in a wool coat steps down into the industrial yard. Victoria Sterling is in that moment the least composed she's been in 41 years. The wool coat is not built for November's raw edge. No hat, no gloves. She's been standing on that platform for the better part of an hour, watching the lights flicker, understanding with growing clarity that she has truly and completely run out of time to find a clean solution. But when the maintenance man appears, she immediately shifts into a different version of herself. Black, mid-30s, City Rail Authority jacket, an ID clipped to his chest. The panic doesn't disappear, it just gets locked away, in a place where it can't be seen. "Good evening," she says, though it's nearly 3 in the morning. Her voice is low and precise, the voice of someone used to being listened to. Marcus doesn't respond immediately. He's reading the scene. Expensive car, expensive woman, expensive problem. His mind is already calculating whether this is a situation he should be involved in. "The electrical system is damaged," he says, keeping his tone neutral. "Professional. I should call maintenance dispatch." "Don't call anyone," she says, and she steps closer. "I'm not in danger. I'm not hurt. I just need the system to stop broadcasting its location. I need maybe 2 hours where nobody is tracking where I am." Marcus has been on the rail authority long enough to know when a situation is going to change his life. He recognizes the look in her eyes. Desperation dressed up as control. Decisions already made, waiting only for him to catch up. "What's in the car?" he asks. "Documents, some personal items. A problem I'm running from, not toward." She places her hand on his arm. A gesture that manages to be both commanding and intimate. Her hands are genuinely cold. He can feel it through his jacket. "I won't ask you to do anything illegal," she continues. "I'm just asking you not to make this official. Not yet. Not for the next few hours." Marcus looks at her. Then he looks at the train car, at the damaged electrical system, at the expensive coat and the composed voice that's barely holding together a woman who clearly hasn't slept properly in days. He thinks about Zuri. He thinks about the careful, orderly life he's built, the safety of rules and protocols. He thinks about the fact that nothing in his experience has prepared him for this moment. "Let me fix the electrical system first," he says. "Then we talk about where you're going." It takes him 40 minutes. While he works, Victoria stands nearby, watching him move through the repair with methodical precision. He doesn't ask questions. He just works. It's the kind of quiet competence that people rarely encounter. A man doing his job well, not for recognition, but because the work itself matters. When it's done, the lights stabilize. The car stops broadcasting its location to the maintenance system. Victoria watches him step down from the car, his work boots finding the platform with practiced certainty. "Now what?" Marcus asks. "Now," she says, "you take me somewhere that isn't on any camera or record. And I tell you why." The all-night diner is 6 miles from the rail yard, off a highway exit that nobody really takes unless they're lost or desperate. Marcus drives a 10-year-old sedan, reliable, maintained, paid for in full. Victoria sits in the passenger seat with her hands folded in her lap. Neither of them speaks until they're sitting in a corner booth, under fluorescent lights that make everything look slightly worse than it actually is. Victoria orders coffee and doesn't touch it. Marcus orders nothing, just sits across from her with his phone face down on the table. A small gesture that tells her he isn't recording this, isn't going to betray whatever she's about to say. "You're not going to ask me who I am," she says after a long silence. "I figured you'd tell me what you wanted me to know." Marcus replies. She studies him. The work jacket, the city ID clipped to his chest, the particular steadiness of someone who has learned not to show when things surprise him. She spent 41 years reading power dynamics in rooms full of people, and there's something about this man that confuses her reading. He has no power in any conventional sense, but he holds himself like someone who doesn't need power to feel secure. "My name is Victoria Sterling," she says. "I'm the CEO of Sterling Capital, a commercial real estate firm. You might have seen the news about a merger we're supposed to sign on Friday morning. $500 million. Marcus's expression doesn't change, but he's heard about it. The city has been buzzing with the news for weeks. Sterling Capital, the Mid-Atlantic's largest development company, being acquired by a national conglomerate. It's the kind of business news that usually doesn't affect people like him. But the city electrical grid is interconnected with the development projects. So he's picked up fragments of information. I need to tell you something that nobody else knows," Victoria continues. And her voice becomes even quieter. "If I sign that merger on Friday morning, 200 families lose their homes. Not because the project fails, because it succeeds exactly the way the people behind it planned." Marcus turns his coffee cup once in his hands. He grew up 3 blocks from the Mill Street corridor. One of those neighborhoods where people have lived for decades, where the laundromats and corner churches and families he knew his entire childhood have slowly disappeared. He watched it happen when he was 19, watched the neighborhood get redeveloped inside 2 years, watched new condominiums go up at prices designed specifically to exclude everyone who had been there before. The city called it development. The people it happened to called it something else. "Who's behind it?" he asks. My cousin Victoria says. "Grant Sterling. He's been restructuring the board for 14 months, collecting proxies, putting people in positions where they vote his way. Regardless of what they claim publicly, the merger structure makes it look like growth. What it actually is a rezoning play. The neighborhoods get reclassified as mixed commercial zones, and the protection that's kept people's rent stable goes away." She pulls out a tablet, shows him documents, the trust structure, board minutes, emails where Grant discusses the rezoning timeline with surgical precision. She shows him the infrastructure amendment. 6 pages deep in a document nobody reads, where the important information is buried in language designed to discourage attention. "My father built this company," Victoria says. "Over 30 years. He died 18 months ago. In his will, he left me the company with a specific condition. I had to maintain controlling interest for at least 5 years before any sale could be finalized. He knew Grant would try. He didn't anticipate how efficiently Grant would work." Marcus leans back in the booth. The shape of it is becoming clear. "What do you need?" he asks. "A way out," Victoria says, "or a way to fight. I'm not sure which yet." "Why me?" Marcus asks. And there's no accusation in the question, just genuine confusion. Victoria is quiet for a moment. She knows she should lie here. She knows the smart thing is to tell him she needs help. Period. But she's been trained by decades of boardroom negotiations to recognize when the truth is more powerful than a careful story. "Because you're steady," she says finally. "And because I need someone who doesn't have anything to lose." Marcus absorbs this. He considers what it means that a CEO worth hundreds of millions of dollars is sitting across from him in a diner at 3 in the morning, admitting that she can't trust the people in her own world. "I have something to lose," he says quietly. "I have a 7-year-old daughter at home. But I understand what you mean." There's a moment where something shifts between them. The moment when Victoria realizes this man sees her as something other than a problem to be solved. And Marcus realizes that the composed woman across from him is genuinely terrified. Beneath the control, his phone lights up with a financial news alert. One he'd set months ago because Sterling Capital's contracts connected to the city electrical grid he maintains. He sees her face on the screen, learns her full name, understands that he's just helped the CEO of a $500 million company escape her own life. "How long have you known?" she asks. "Since the diner. And you're still here." "You haven't given me a reason to leave yet," he says. She nods slowly. And there's something almost fragile about the gesture. She looks back at the coffee she hasn't touched, then back at him. "My father left a note," she says, "about the merger. One sentence. This is not what we built this for." He was right. I know he was right, but if I refuse to sign, my cousin has a plan in place. He'll use a clause in my father's trust. Something inserted at the last minute, hidden in revisions nobody reread, to trigger a competency review. He'll frame my refusal as erratic behavior. He'll leak stories to journalists about me being emotionally unstable. The review will take months. While I'm fighting it in court, he'll let Stratton walk from the deal. The company will be in turmoil. And he'll position himself as the stabilizing alternative. I'll lose the company my father built. I'll lose my credibility. I'll lose everything. She pauses. Unless I find something that makes it impossible for him to move forward. Unless I find leverage. Marcus understands now, not why she chose him, but why she thinks she needs him. "You need corroboration," he says. "Something from outside the company, something that touches the project from a different angle. Something that can't be attributed to a CEO protecting her own position." "Yes," Victoria says. Marcus calls home at 4:17 a.m., knowing it will worry Mrs. Chen, knowing she'll answer alert and worried, knowing she's the kind of neighbor who takes that kind of thing seriously. "It's me," he says. "I'm going to need you to keep Dury tomorrow through evening, maybe longer. There's a situation at work." Mrs. Chen doesn't ask questions immediately. She asks the questions that matter. "Are you safe? Is this legal? Do you need help?" He answers yes to the first, yes to the second, and no to the third. She tells him Zuri is sleeping, that she'll keep her as long as needed, that he should be careful. When he hangs up, Victoria's looking at him with an expression he can't quite read. He realizes she heard enough of the conversation to understand what he was doing. He was securing his daughter before he committed to whatever comes next. "I have a daughter," he says, though she already knows this. 7 years old. Her name is Zuri. Her mother and I aren't together anymore. Haven't been for 4 years. Victoria doesn't respond immediately. Marcus watches something flicker across her expression. Calculation, yes. But something underneath it. Something that looks almost like guilt. "She's asleep now," Marcus continues. "She's with my neighbor, Mrs. Chen. She'll be safe there. But if what you're telling me is true, if this situation escalates, it could affect her, her life, her stability, the way people perceive her father. I need you to understand that I'm making a choice, knowing that cost." Victoria sets down the coffee cup she hasn't touched. Her hands are steadier now, but there's something else in her face, a kind of recognition, maybe, or the acknowledgement of what it costs for an ordinary man to help an extraordinary problem. "I know," she says quietly, "and I'm sorry that I'm putting him in that position. It's the first time she's apologized. It's the first time she's acknowledged that there's something beyond the transaction happening here." They sit there for a while, neither speaking. Marcus thinks about Zuri waking up in Mrs. Chen's guest room. About the moment she realized her father wasn't coming home. He thinks about all the times he's told himself that his careful, orderly life was enough. And he realizes that sitting across from this woman, he's made a choice that will unravel whatever careful structure he's built. He's not angry about it, just aware. Tell me everything, he says. They move to Marcus's apartment, a small one-bedroom where he'd converted the living room into a second sleeping space for Zuri. The apartment is clean, in the way that single fathers keep their spaces, when they've accepted that there's no one to impress but their daughters. Books on the shelves, Zuri's school projects taped to the refrigerator. Photographs on the mantle that chronicle his entire adult life in images. Victoria sits at the kitchen table, while Marcus sets up his laptop. The city issued one. Slow and ancient, the kind of equipment the rail authority provides to maintenance staff who aren't expected to need sophisticated computing power. She spreads documents across the table. Board minutes, financial statements, proxy agreements, corporate structures laid out in the visual language of power. She walks him through it with precision, the precision of someone who has spent her entire life translating complex financial information for people who need to understand it quickly. The board has 7 independent members, 3 of them now vote with Grant. Regardless of what they say in public, she shows him how. Money moved through shell companies in Delaware, contracts awarded to consulting firms that produce nothing, consulting fees that are really bribes. It's not subtle, Victoria says, pointing to a line item. Once you know what you're looking for. But if you don't know what you're looking for, it looks like normal business activity. Marcus reads the technical details, infrastructure approvals, electrical contractors, municipal compliance filings. He's not a lawyer and has never pretended to be. But he's spent 14 years reading technical documents that other people glossed over. He understands the language of specifications and code sections and buried amendments. This subcontractor, he says, pointing to a line. Vantage Electrical Systems. They're listed as the primary low-voltage contractor for all the Stratton development sites. Victoria nods. Marcus sets down the document. He stands up and walks to the window, looks out at the city, then turns back to face her. 8 months ago, he says, I filed an incident report on a Vantage crew working a municipal retrofit in the Mill Street sector. 3 safety violations in one site. Load calculations that didn't match the permits. I documented everything. Dates, crew IDs, the specific code sections they were out of compliance with. Victoria's expression shifts. She becomes very still. The report went into the system. Marcus continues. I followed up twice. Nothing. I assumed it was the usual backlog. It wasn't backlog, Victoria says quietly. No, Marcus says. It was buried. Because if Vantage gets flagged, the infrastructure approval for the Stratton sites falls apart. And if that falls apart, the entire legal foundation of the merger becomes contestable. He turns back to her. There's no accusation in his voice, just the flat realization of how perfectly the pieces fit together. You knew, he says. I knew a name on a report that had been suppressed, Victoria says. 2 weeks ago, Grant was reviewing infrastructure files. He had a stack of documents on the conference room table. I walked in early. Your report was on top. Your name, your ID number, your signature. She doesn't look away. He closed the folder before I could read past the header. She continues. I didn't know what it was at the time. I didn't know your name. I just knew something was being hidden. Marcus sits back down. He's processing multiple things simultaneously. The violation he'd reported months ago. The system that buried it. The realization that Victoria had discovered his name before they'd ever met. Did you engineer it, he asks. The breakdown on the train platform. Did you know I worked that line? Victoria is quiet for a moment. This is the moment where she could lie. Where a smart woman would lie. To preserve the alliance she needs. But she looks at this man who's already helped her. Who's already risked his stability for her. And she chooses honesty. The breakdown was real, she says. The storm was real. I lost control on the ice, trying to get away from the hotel without security. But when I realized who you were, when I understood that you worked that line, that you drove that road after your shift, she pauses. Yes. I understood what that meant for what I was trying to do. You were going to use me, Marcus says. It's not a question. In the beginning, Victoria admits, your report corroborates my story. It shows the merger infrastructure was legally flawed from the start. It shows a pattern of suppression. It gives my story credibility that it doesn't have coming just from me. And now Victoria looks at him directly. Now I don't know. You're not useful anymore. The report is already documented, already in the system, and I'm still sitting here with you telling you things I shouldn't tell anyone. So either I'm making a terrible mistake or something's changed. She lets the silence sit between them. I'm hoping it's the second one, she says quietly. Marcus doesn't respond immediately. He stands, moves to the window again, looks out at the city coming toward dawn. Somewhere in this city, Zuri is sleeping in Mrs. Chen's guest room. Somewhere in this city, his entire careful, orderly life just became significantly more complicated. What happens if we go public, he asks. We lose any legal strategy. We lose the ability to negotiate. We become the story instead of the evidence. But people know the truth. People know one version of the truth, Victoria says. The question is whether that version can stand against 14 months of Grant's preparation and the power of people who want this merger to happen. Marcus turns to face her. My daughter is 7 years old, he says. She doesn't understand corporate corruption or board dynamics or the difference between legal and technically illegal. She just knows her father. And if I'm going to do this, I'm going to do it in a way that doesn't make her ashamed of who I am. I'm going to do it in a way that teaches her that some things matter more than safety. Victoria nods. She understands that he's made a choice. Okay, she says, let's figure out how to burn them. The sun rises over the city at 6:48 a.m. and Marcus still hasn't slept. Victoria's asleep on his couch, her expensive coat draped over the arm. Her body finally allowing itself the kind of rest that only complete exhaustion permits. He sits at the kitchen table with the documents spread out, reading through his own report from 8 months ago, tracing the path from his careful documentation to suppression, to the moment a woman fell into his life and made him complicit in exposing corruption. At 7:15 a.m. his phone buzzes, a text from Mrs. Chen. Zuri asking about you, she's okay. But she's asking, he types back, tell her I'm handling a situation at work. Tell her I love her. By 8:30 a.m. Victoria wakes. She looks around the small apartment, at the evidence of his life, the structure he's built, the photographs that document his journey from teenage father to mature man trying to do right by his daughter. She sees his life clearly, maybe for the first time, and the weight of what she's asking him to do becomes viscerally real. I need to tell you something, Marcus says, and his voice is steady, but his jaw is tight. When I woke up this morning, I had a plan, a life plan. It wasn't ambitious, just stable. Work, raise Zuri, maybe eventually move to that supervisory position I've been putting off. Keep my head down, keep my daughter safe, build a quiet life. Victoria watches him. And then he continues. You arrived in the middle of my careful life, and I realized something. I realized that I've been so focused on protecting Zuri from chaos that I've been teaching her to be small. I've been showing her that survival is more important than principle, that keeping the peace is more important than truth. I'm sorry, Victoria says. Don't be, Marcus says. I'm not angry. I'm just clear about what I'm choosing. I'm choosing to be the man Zuri's gonna look up to. I'm choosing to be someone who made hard decisions because they were right, not because they were safe. He walks to the window. Outside, the city is waking up. People are going to work, living their lives. Unaware that in a small apartment in a working-class neighborhood, a decision is being made that will reverberate through the corporate world. My question, Marcus says, turning back to face her, is whether you're making the same choice. Because we can take these documents to the authorities, we can build a case, but we can also try to negotiate, try to force Grant into a corner where he has to back down without a public fight. That's the safer route, but it's also the route where he might survive this, where he might disappear into some other company, some other scheme, and do the same thing somewhere else. Victoria stands. She walks to the window and stands beside him. The morning light is soft, almost tender, which feels wrong for the conversation they're having. I've spent my entire life, Victoria says, trying to be smart enough, careful enough, perfect enough to protect my position. My father used to say that in business you win by being 3 steps ahead of everyone else. I've been 3 steps ahead my entire career, and it's made me someone who could watch corruption happen and still be calculating the safest way to respond. She looks at him. I'm tired of being smart about the wrong things, she says. So no, we don't negotiate. We go public. We make it impossible for him to hide, and we accept whatever comes from that. Marcus nods. It's 9:15 a.m. on a Wednesday morning, and they've just made a choice that will reshape both their lives. Okay, he says, let's call the authorities. Marcus picks up Zuri from Mrs. Chen's apartment that afternoon, and he can see immediately that she knows something is wrong. She's quiet in the car, in a way she never is. Not the peaceful quiet of a content child, but the careful quiet of someone trying to manage something beyond her understanding. Hey, Bug, Marcus says, glancing at her in the rearview mirror. How was your night? Mrs. Chen was worried, Zuri says, not directly answering his question. She kept checking her phone. She was talking to someone on the phone, and her voice sounded scared. Marcus's hands tighten on the steering wheel. He'd hoped to shield Zuri from this, but he's learning that shielding children from reality just teaches them to distrust the adults who claim to be protecting them. Your dad is handling something at work, he says, keeping his voice steady. It's not dangerous, but it's complicated, and it might be strange for a little while. Is Mommy coming back? Zuri asks, and her voice is so small that it cracks something in him. No, baby. Mommy isn't coming back. We've talked about that. Are you leaving? Zuri's eyes are wide in the mirror. Terrified. No, Marcus says firmly. I'm not leaving. I'm right here, and I'm not going anywhere. But Zuri isn't reassured, because she's smart enough to recognize when her father is being partial with the truth. She knows he said, I'm not leaving. Nothing is going to change. That evening, after Zuri is asleep, Marcus sits on the edge of her bed and watches her sleep with one arm hanging off the side, reaching for something even in unconsciousness. He thinks about the promise he made, that he's not going to let anyone disappear. He thinks about what that promise might cost. He pulls out his phone and calls Victoria. She knows something's wrong, he says. Not the details, but she knows. I'm sorry, Victoria says, and he can hear the exhaustion in her voice. Don't apologize, Marcus says. Just be ready for what comes next. By Thursday morning, the narrative is shifting. Grant has moved faster than Victoria anticipated. He's called an emergency board session for 8 a.m. Not Wednesday, not Friday, but Thursday, which gives him the element of surprise and eliminates the possibility of Victoria organizing a counter-strategy. The financial journalists who received Grant's carefully crafted leak have published their stories in the business sections. Sterling Capital's CEO under scrutiny for erratic leadership. Questions mount about executive stability at billion-dollar firm. The articles are written with careful neutrality. That implies guilt while maintaining plausible deniability about their sourcing. Marcus experiences this unfolding through Victoria's phone, through the stream of messages from board members and attorneys, and people whose names he doesn't know. He watches her carefully composed exterior begin to fracture under the weight of a machine that's designed to crush people who aren't prepared for it. He watches, in other words, what it means to be powerful in a world that doesn't care about your power once it's decided you're a liability. They're going to vote to trigger the competency review, Victoria says, and her voice is hollow with the realization of it. Grant's already turned 3 more members. He has them all now, or almost all. Then we don't wait, Marcus says. Victoria looks at him. What do you mean? I mean, we don't wait for Friday. I mean, we go public today. We give them the documents, the report, everything. We make it impossible for them to vote on anything, except how to cooperate with the investigation. That means no negotiation, Victoria says. That means no possibility of a clean transition or a dignified exit. That means burn it all down. Yes, Marcus says. Victoria is quiet. She walks to the window of the hotel room where she's been hiding, looks out at the city that is currently processing the narrative that she is unstable, unfit, unworthy of the power she holds. Okay, she says, let's burn it down. The city's Transportation and Infrastructure Committee holds hearings every other Tuesday. It's the kind of government proceeding that usually draws zero public attention. Regulations about rail safety, discussions of budget allocations, the kind of institutional machinery that keeps the city functioning without anyone thinking about it. Marcus walks into that hearing room on a Thursday morning as a private citizen with evidence of suppression, and he transforms the machinery into a story. He's not eloquent, he doesn't try to be, he just stands at the microphone and tells the truth. Methodically, with the kind of technical precision that comes from 14 years of maintaining infrastructure that matters. He details the report he filed, the safety violations he documented, the follow-up he did. The moment he realized his report had been suppressed, he provides dates, crew identification numbers, the specific code sections that were violated, the communication where officials acknowledge receipt of his report and then did nothing with it. By the time he finishes, the room is completely still. The journalists who came expecting to cover a routine hearing are suddenly covering a story about corporate corruption, suppressed evidence, and a merger with a fractured legal foundation. The story breaks before noon. By 1 p.m., Sterling Capital's stock price begins to drop. By 3 p.m., the board has issued a statement suspending the merger, pending investigation. By 5 p.m., Grant Sterling has lawyered up and vanished from public view. Victoria watches it unfold from a coffee shop 3 miles from Sterling Capital's headquarters. She's wearing sunglasses indoors and a hoodie, the uniform of someone hiding in plain sight. When the merger suspension is announced, she removes the sunglasses and looks at Marcus with an expression he's never seen on her face before. It's something like relief. It's also something like loss. We did it, she says. But her voice doesn't sound victorious. Not yet, Marcus says. Now comes the investigation. By Friday morning, Marcus is called into his supervisor's office at the rail authority. The supervisor is a man named Tom. He's been in the job for 15 years and has learned to navigate departmental politics with careful neutrality. That keeps you employed but never promoted. You testified yesterday, Tom says. It's not a question. I did, Marcus confirms. Without notifying your supervisor or your union representative. I notified my union representative 2 hours before I testified, Marcus says, because he's smart enough to protect himself from the basic angles. I have the email confirmation. Tom nods slowly. The department is going to have to investigate. Not because you did anything wrong, but because the higher-ups need to be able to say we investigated. It's going to be uncomfortable. I understand, Marcus says. You did the right thing, Tom continues. And there's something almost soft in his voice now. That took guts. Stupid guts, but guts. Make sure you document everything. Marcus returns to his regular shift that evening. He's exhausted, in a way that sleep won't fix. He keeps thinking about Zuri, about the moment she realizes her father is the person the news is talking about. Meanwhile, Victoria is dealing with her own institution. The board has suspended her pending investigation. She's technically still CEO, but her authority is frozen. Grant is cooperating with authorities, which means he's telling them exactly enough to implicate everyone except himself. She and Marcus don't see each other that night or the next day. They exist in parallel, both validated by events, both terrified about what comes next. 3 weeks of careful reconstruction, federal investigators with suits and notepads, interviewing everyone, piecing together the mechanisms of corruption. Marcus is interviewed twice, once officially, once informally. His union representative attends both times. He brings his original incident report, his photographs from the site, his follow-up communications. He's a good witness because he's not trying to be a witness, he's just telling the truth. Victoria's interviewed 7 times. She cooperates completely, provides every document, every email, every conversation that's relevant. She's been advised by her attorney that cooperation is her best defense. She follows that advice meticulously. By late December, the investigation reaches its conclusion. Grant Sterling faces charges related to securities fraud, corruption, and conspiracy. 3 board members face lesser charges. Vantage Electrical Systems is under investigation by the Federal Contractors Office. The Sterling Capital Board issues a statement supporting Victoria's reinstatement as CEO. The merger is officially dead. Sterling Capital will remain independent, will remain committed to its founding principles, will undergo significant restructuring. On the day the announcement is made, Victoria shows up at the rail yard, where Marcus works. She's dressed differently than he's seen her before. No suit, just regular clothes. Her hair down instead of pulled back into its CEO armor. She looks younger maybe, or just more human. I wanted to tell you myself, she says, before the news releases it officially. The board voted to bring in new leadership at Sterling Capital. I'm stepping back as CEO. I'm going to maintain my position as chair, but I'm bringing in a professional management team. Marcus absorbs this. It's a massive decision. It's also he recognizes her version of the sacrifice he made. Why, he asks, because I realize something Victoria says. I realize that I've been so focused on protecting my position that I've been protecting the wrong things. The company is important, but it's not as important as the kind of person I want to be. And I couldn't be that person and keep running Sterling Capital the way I've been running it. She looks at him. I want to try something different, she says. I don't know what it looks like yet, but I want to try. Christmas comes, and Marcus thinks they're going to make it through without a second catastrophe. He's naive about this, as it turns out. James Patterson calls Victoria on December 26th. He's her ex-husband from a 7-year marriage that ended 8 years ago. He's a lawyer. Corporate, profitable, well-connected. He's also, as it turns out, someone who's been monitoring the news about Sterling Capital and Victoria's name with considerable interest. The property settlement from their divorce was never quite finalized. There's a house that they co-owned, with a complex arrangement about its sale and the division of proceeds. The paperwork sat for 8 years. Because Victoria was focused on the company and James didn't care enough to push it, now he cares. Now Victoria has stepped back from the company and is vulnerable to pressure in ways she wasn't before. Now her relationship with Marcus is public knowledge, and James has identified a lever. He calls with a proposal. He's willing to finalize the settlement, but he wants a much lower sale price for the house. Significantly lower. The kind of lower that represents a transfer of wealth from Victoria to him. In violation of their original agreement, I have leverage, he tells his lawyer, who advises against this approach but listens anyway. She's with this black maintenance worker. Though optics are complicated for her, the social world she comes from doesn't look kindly on that kind of pairing. I can make this very public and very painful. Victoria receives the first draft of his proposal on a Tuesday in January. She reads it, and something in her hardens. He wants to use you, she tells Marcus that evening. He wants to use the fact that we're together as pressure to make me accept a settlement that violates our agreement. Let him, Marcus says. What Victoria looks at him like he's suggested something insane. Let him try to use us, Marcus repeats. Let him make it public. Let him say whatever he wants to say about an interracial couple. And then let's see how that plays out in a modern courtroom. When he's trying to use racial assumptions about who's appropriate for whom. Victoria is quiet. He's counting on you being ashamed, Marcus continues. He's counting on you hiding. Because you're worried about how this looks to people. Don't hide. Make him defend why he thinks that matters. By February, they've started a tentative cohabitation. Victoria has an apartment in the city. Expensive, elegant, the kind of space that reflects her position in the world. Marcus is living there 2 or 3 nights a week, bringing Zuri on weekends. It's an odd arrangement, but it works for the moment. And then Victoria suggests something that brings their fundamental differences into sharp focus. I want us to move, she says, to a house, a real house, somewhere with a yard where Zuri could have friends, where she could play safely outside. I have an apartment, Marcus says. It's paid for. I own it. I know, Victoria says, but it's a 1-bedroom. Zuri sleeps in the living room. There's no stability in that arrangement. There's complete stability, Marcus says. And there's something hard in his voice now. There's no mortgage, no landlord, no one who can take it from me. Victoria doesn't understand. She wants to understand, but she's never lived in a world where housing security is something you have to fight for. I'm not trying to take anything from you, she says. I'm trying to build something with you. By replacing what I've built, Marcus says. Every time you see my life, you see something that needs fixing. I'm not a problem that needs your solution, Victoria. I'm a man who's built a life with what I have, and I need you to respect that. Victoria is quiet. She stands in her expensive apartment, surrounded by furniture that costs more than his car. And she realizes something that she should have understood long before now. Her love looks like charity to him, and his self-respect won't let him accept charity. I'm sorry, she says. I didn't mean it like that. I know, Marcus says. But that's how it felt. They don't talk about moving again. But the conversation sits between them. A reminder that they're not just from different worlds. They're from fundamentally different ways of understanding safety and stability. Zuri's school holds a Family Day celebration in early March. A chance for families to attend their child's classroom, meet the teachers, see the work their children are doing. Marcus and Victoria decide to attend together. It's a Friday morning, and the school is filled with families. Most of them look a certain way, mostly white, mostly affluent, mostly the kind of people who talk about education the way Victoria does, as an investment in human capital. They walk in together. Marcus in his work clothes. He came straight from a shift. Victoria in casual elegance that's still somehow clearly expensive. And Zuri between them, holding both their hands. Marcus feels the looks immediately. He's trained himself not to notice them after 39 years. But standing next to Victoria, they become impossible to ignore. The moment of recalibration, the quick assessment, the barely concealed judgment. One mother approaches them directly, blonde, with the kind of confidence that comes from a lifetime of knowing you belong. Zuri is such a bright student, she says, addressing Marcus while looking at Victoria with barely concealed curiosity. So are you? She doesn't finish the question, but they all know what she's asking. Zuri grips both their hands a little tighter. She's 7 and smart, and she understands that something about their family is being evaluated in that moment. Victoria doesn't hesitate. She extends her hand to the mother. I'm Victoria, she says. Zuri's stepmother, boyfriend, family. Pick whatever word works for you. The mother's face goes carefully blank. She shakes Victoria's hand and excuses herself. As they move through the school, Marcus watches Victoria carry this experience differently than he does. He's learned to make himself smaller in spaces like this. Victoria, by contrast, seems to expand, to take up more space, to hold her head higher, to make it clear through sheer presence that she belongs there. and that anyone who disagrees can manage their own discomfort. They look at Zuri's classroom work, they listen to her teacher talk about her progress, and at the end when they're leaving, Zuri squeezes both their hands and says in that casual way children have of understanding things adults are still working through, "I'm glad you both came." In the car on the way out, Marcus looks at Victoria. "Thank you," he says. "For what? For not pretending we're something we're not. For not apologizing for us." Victoria reaches over and squeezes his hand. "I'm done apologizing for my life," she says. "I'm done making myself smaller to make other people comfortable." In April, James Patterson does something. Something that crosses a line even he should have recognized. He files for custody of Zuri. The claim is baseless. Marcus is her biological father, her primary caregiver, a man with stable employment and a clean record. James has no legal standing whatsoever. But the claim exists, which means lawyers have to respond to it, which means court dates and documentation, and the kind of institutional machinery that grinds forward regardless of merit. Marcus's union provides him with a lawyer through his benefits. The lawyer is good, smart, experienced, someone who's handled cases like this before. But the first hearing is in front of a judge who's been on the bench for 23 years, in a system that still carries assumptions about what makes a stable family environment. The judge hears arguments about Zuri's living situation, about Marcus's job stability, about the fact that he's just been involved in high-profile legal proceedings. James's lawyer is good. He plants seeds of doubt without saying anything directly racist or obviously prejudicial. Marcus sits in that courtroom and experiences for the first time in his life the profound vulnerability of someone whose child is being used as leverage in someone else's game. Victoria is there with him. She sits in the back row. She doesn't speak. But her presence means something. It means that someone with power is standing next to him. The judge rules after 40 minutes of deliberation that the custody claim has no merit. James is ordered to withdraw the suit and to stop pursuing this course of action. The judge also issues a warning. Any further frivolous claims will result in sanctions. Marcus and Victoria walk out of the courthouse, and Marcus is shaking with an anger and relief he can't quite separate. "I want you to understand something," he says to Victoria as they reach the car. "That was always going to happen because you were there. If I'd been alone, the outcome might have been different. We're only equal in this system when we have someone with power standing next to us. That's the reality of it." Victoria nods. She understands. "That's why we're not going to stop being next to each other," she says. It's a Tuesday evening in May, and they're cooking dinner together in Victoria's apartment. Zuri is sitting at the kitchen counter, with homework spread out in front of her. She's occasionally asking questions about math problems. Marcus is chopping vegetables. Victoria is working on sauce. It's the kind of ordinary domestic scene that used to feel impossible to him. Zuri finishes her math, puts the pencil down, and just watches them for a while. She's always been an observer. That one. She watches how people move together, how they talk, what the silences between them mean. "Dad," she says finally. Marcus looks up. He's learned to read Zuri's tone, and this one carries weight. "Yeah, baby, is Victoria going to stay?" Zuri's voice is smaller than usual, or is she going to leave like Mummy? The kitchen goes very quiet. Even Victoria stops moving. Marcus sets down his knife and walks over to Zuri. He crouches down so they're at eye level, and he takes her small hands in his large ones. "That's a really big question," he says carefully. "And I want to give you an honest answer. I can't promise that nothing hard will ever happen. I can't promise that Victoria and I won't disagree sometimes, or that life won't get complicated. People do disagree, and life does get complicated. That's just what being alive looks like." Zuri watches him with her mother's eyes, wide and serious. But Marcus continues, "I can promise you something else. I can promise that Victoria is choosing to be here. Not because she has to, Not because she's stuck, not because it's convenient. She's choosing to be here every single day. And people who choose, who keep choosing even when it gets hard, those are the people who stay. He looks over at Victoria. Isn't that right? Victoria comes around the counter and crouches down beside them. She doesn't make any grand promises. She just speaks the truth as clearly as she can. I'm not replacing your other mother, she says to Zuri. I can't do that, but I can be someone who loves your dad and loves you. I can be someone who chose both of you. Not by accident or circumstance, but by decision. And I'm going to keep choosing. Even when things get complicated. Especially then. Zuri is quiet for a moment. Then she asks the question that's probably been driving everything else. Can I call you mommy? Victoria doesn't rush to answer. She considers what the question means. What it costs Zuri to ask it. What it means to accept it. That's something we should talk about as a family, she says finally. Your dad and I, because it's a big word and it means something. It doesn't mean I'm replacing your other mother. It means you have another person who loves you like that. Is that okay? Zuri nods slowly. Can I think about it? Of course, Victoria says. You can think about it as long as you need to. By the end of May, they make a decision. They buy a house together. Not Victoria's choice of elegant neighborhood. Not Marcus's apartment, but a compromise. A place in a neighborhood that's changing, that has good schools and enough space, and doesn't represent either of their worlds, as much as it represents a shared one. The house hunt becomes a project that all three of them participate in. Zuri has strong opinions about bathrooms and kitchen layouts. Marcus cares about the electrical systems and the structural integrity. Victoria looks at potential and development. They find a place that everyone can agree on, which turns out to be more difficult than anyone anticipated. Marcus negotiates the timing of his shift work with his supervisor. He takes the supervisory position he'd been offered years ago. It comes with better pay, more regular hours, and the possibility of actually being home for dinner on most nights. Victoria continues stepping back from daily operations at Sterling Capital, building a new role around community development initiatives. Zuri starts second grade at her new school in August. She brings home her class picture, and Marcus is struck by how happy she looks. Not the careful happiness of a child managing difficult circumstances, but genuine joy. One evening they're all in the kitchen together, and Zuri asks the question again, more casually this time. Can I call you mommy? Victoria sets down the spoon she's holding and looks at Zuri directly. Yes, she says. If you want to, if that feels right to you. Zuri thinks about it for approximately 10 seconds, which is probably the longest she's thought about anything in her 7-year-old life. Okay, she says, you're mommy. It's not dramatic, it's not magical, it's just a moment where a family forms itself into a shape it can live inside. Zuri's school holds a spring art exhibition in late April, the anniversary of Family Day. Come full circle. The gymnasium is decorated with student artwork. Parents wander through with cups of punch and small paper plates of cookies. Teachers chat with families. It's the kind of ordinary school event that happens at thousands of schools across the country every year. Zuri leads them to her display board. There are watercolor paintings, trees, buildings, abstract patterns that probably represent her understanding of the world. There are pencil drawings of her classroom, and in the center there's a new painting, a house under a deep blue sky, with 3 figures holding hands in front of it. One of Zuri's classmates stops beside them. Who are they? She asks, pointing to the 3 figures. Neither Marcus nor Victoria answers for her. They step back slightly, giving Zuri space to claim her own story. Zuri looks up at them. At Marcus in his work clothes, at Victoria in casual elegance, and then she looks back at her drawing. That's my family, she says. with the kind of simple certainty that only a child can muster. Her classmate nods like this is a completely normal answer. "Cool," she says, and wanders off toward the cookie table. Marcus and Victoria exchange a look over Zuri's head. There's something almost sacred about the moment when Zuri claims this version of her family publicly, without apology, without explanation, just as a fact of her life. "I like the shoes," Victoria says, pointing to the figures in the drawing. "They're still dramatic." Zuri grins. "They're supposed to be. Everyone should have dramatic shoes." Marcus reaches down and takes both their hands. Without having to think himself into courage, they stand there together, in the bright school lights, past the moment where anyone who cared was watching, and Marcus understands something important. Love, when it's real, doesn't need to be defended. It just needs to be lived. By September, 14 months after Marcus pulled Victoria's car onto the rail yard platform, the investigation reaches its conclusion. Grant Sterling is convicted on charges of securities fraud and conspiracy. He faces 7 years in federal prison, with possibility of parole after 5. The conviction isn't as clean as Victoria would have wanted, but it's justice nonetheless. He will spend time understanding what his corruption cost, and that matters. Vantage Electrical Systems loses its municipal contracts. Their CEO faces charges related to bribery and falsifying safety records. The company, it turns out, has been cutting corners for years. Marcus's report was just the beginning of what a more careful investigation revealed. 3 board members plead guilty to lesser charges related to accepting bribes. They forfeit significant portions of their wealth and face the public humiliation of exposure. James Patterson is reprimanded by the Bar Association for his custody claim and required to undergo ethics training. The East Side neighborhoods that were going to be displaced are spared. A new development plan emerges, one that preserves the existing community, while adding new housing in a way that doesn't displace people. It's not perfect, but it's real, and it protects people who would otherwise have been scattered across the city. Sterling Capital, under new professional leadership, commits to a new investment strategy, focused on community-centered development. Victoria takes on a role as community advisor, using her expertise and her wealth in service of outcomes that actually benefit the communities where development happens. Marcus receives a formal commendation from the city for his integrity and cooperation with the investigation. His incident report becomes part of infrastructure policy discussions, a case study in why safety violations matter, and why systems that suppress safety reports destroy the mechanisms that protect people. It's a Saturday in June, exactly 1 year and 8 months after the night on the rail platform. Marcus and Victoria stand in the backyard of their house, the compromise house, in the changing neighborhood, watching Zuri run in circles with a group of second-grade friends. She's wearing a dress with dramatic shoes, just like she always does, and she's laughing, with the unself-conscious joy of a child who feels genuinely safe. Victoria has her hand in Marcus's, and he's thinking about how different this moment is from the diner table that felt like the beginning of everything. This is what the middle of everything looks like, not the climax or the resolution, but the actual living, the cooking dinner together, the homework help, the ordinary way they've become a family. She asked me yesterday if she could call me mommy at school, Victoria says, watching Zuri play. I asked her if that felt right to her, and she said it did. She's been calling me mom at home for months now, but she wanted to make sure it was okay to do it at school too. What did you tell her? Marcus asks. I told her it was more than okay, Victoria says. I told her that she gets to decide who her family is and how she claims it, that nobody else gets a vote in that. They stand there in comfortable silence. In the distance, sirens wail, the city going about its business, unaware of the 3 people standing in a backyard, Unaware of the fight it took to get here, I was thinking Victoria says about that moment in the diner. When I told you about the merger, you could have told me no. You could have driven me somewhere else and called the authorities instead of helping me. I know Marcus says. Why didn't you? Marcus thinks about this. He thinks about the moment he saw her standing beside that train car, about the decision that felt less like a choice and more like inevitability. He thinks about the man he was before Victoria Sterling existed in his world and the man he's become. Because he says, finally I recognized that you were trying to do something that mattered, and I knew you needed help, and I knew that helping you meant becoming a version of myself. I'd been putting off becoming, so I chose to help, not because it was safe, but because it was right. Victoria leans her head against his shoulder. In the backyard, Zuri is teaching her friends the dance from a music video she loves. She's completely unself-conscious about it. Completely sure of her right to take up space. I think I figured out something, Victoria says. About family. About love. About what matters. I think I spent so much of my life trying to protect myself that I forgot that real safety doesn't come from protection. It comes from choosing people who choose you back. Marcus squeezes her hand. Zuri runs over to them, breathless. Mom! Dad, can we do ice cream? She asks, using both their titles like they're the most natural words in the world. Like now is good, Marcus says. And they walk together toward the car. This man, this woman, this child, a family that looks different than any of them expected, but absolutely true. 6 months later, on a bright morning in December, Marcus stands on the rail platform at dawn. The trains are preparing for the early morning routes. He's been promoted to track operations supervisor, which means his schedule has shifted. He now works days instead of nights. A car pulls up to the fence. Victoria's car. She rolls down the window, and Zuri is in the passenger seat with a paper bag. Breakfast surprise, Zuri announces. We brought bagels and hot chocolate from your favorite place. They pull up as close as security allows, and Marcus takes a break from his inspection to sit on a nearby bench with the two of them. They eat bagels on a platform where he used to work nights alone, and now he's sitting here, in the soft morning light, with the family that he built, by choosing honesty over safety. Zuri tells him about school. Victoria updates him on a community development project. They're ordinary conversations about ordinary life, but they're infused with a kind of grace that only comes from people who've been tested and chosen each other anyway. As they prepare to leave, Victoria reaches for his hand. I have something I want to ask you, she says. Marcus is suddenly nervous. He's not sure what the question is, but he can feel its weight. I'm listening, he says. I want to make this official, Victoria says. Not the legal part. I don't care about that. Technically, we're already a family. I want to do it publicly. A ceremony, nothing huge, just people who matter to us. I want to stand in front of them and say that this is my family, that you're my commitment, that Zuri is my daughter in every way that matters. I want to do that if you want to do it with me. Marcus looks at this woman. Who fell into his life from a broken train car? Who taught him that sometimes you have to risk everything to save what matters? Yes, he says, I want that. Zuri, who hasn't been told about this question, erupts into celebration. That causes several transit workers to look over in amusement. She's 7 years old, and completely certain that her family is perfect exactly as it is. They drive away as the sun rises over the city, and Marcus watches them go. Then he returns to his inspection, checking the electrical systems that keep the trains running, the infrastructure that allows the city to function. He's just a maintenance man, nothing special, but he's also a man who chose his daughter's well-being over his own safety. A man who helped expose corruption because it was right. Not because it was convenient, a man who built a family with someone from a completely different world and made it work through honesty and commitment, and the stubborn refusal to let fear make every decision. The trains run on time, the lights stay on, and somewhere in the city, a family that looks different than anyone expected is learning what it means to truly belong to each other. Sometimes a family begins with loss. Marcus knew this from his childhood, from watching his mother work 3 jobs to keep him fed. Sometimes a family begins with survival, with the bare fact of people enduring together when the world makes that difficult. And sometimes, if you're very lucky, a family begins the moment someone refuses to walk away. When leaving would be easier. The moment someone says, "I choose you. I choose this. I choose to be here despite the cost." That's what Victoria did. That's what Marcus recognized in her, even when she was still trying to hide it beneath composure and strategy. That's what they both discovered together. That love isn't something that happens to you. It's something you do over and over, in small choices and large ones, in the willingness to be vulnerable with another person and accept their vulnerability in return. If this story stayed with you, if the choice to stand for what matters, despite personal risk, resonates with you, then subscribe to our channel for more stories about grace, second chances, and the quiet courage it takes to love well.